Hey friends! So this first video is going to be talking about materials that you will need to make a homemade bind. Again, just want to remind folks that, everything that we do here is going to be for personal use only or for gifting. Want you to be mindful that it is illegal to buy and sell fanfic. At no part of this bind along will I ask you to send me money, to pay me money, to participate in this at all. Everything should be pretty much just stuff that you have at home. If you want to buy things for the bind along, you definitely can. I will have materials linked and I will let you know what I will be using and try to also list alternatives that you can use to participate as we go through this process. Again, I'm just showing pieces that I have available readily, right, to show you. And these are all binds that I'm showing off just that I've made before. They are not perfect by any means. They might look like it on video, but they really aren't. And so let's go ahead and just jump in, right? So first thing that you will need for any bind is paper, right? For binding specifically, this is what I am going to be using. Try to show you here. I'm going to be using, I got this on Amazon for I think $15 or $16. And now this is 500 pages, right? But it's 11 by 17 paper. And cut it, you got 1,000 pages total, right? And I found that there are really easy ways to cut this at home. I don't like to pay the $6 or $7, depending on where you live, fee to get it cut at the store because there are mistakes that they can make as well. So just showing you a couple options. If you want to buy paper, short grain paper specifically for this bind along, you can do that. You can also use any paper that you have at home. Long grain paper, right? The normal 11.5 by 11, like this one right here, is totally fine. You will notice a slight difference in how your book actually sits and lays flat if you use long grain paper. But again, it is perfectly okay to use what you have at home, see how you like the process of binding, and use the paper that you have before investing in anything else, right? And so let me try to show you this one specifically. With short grain paper, right, most of the pages you can see here are laying flat like they would nicely in a book. Now, if you have long grain paper, it's not going to lie flat like this. It's not going to be kind of the normal kind of form of a book, right, that we see with it lying flat. It will open up, might be harder, but again, use what you have at home. I encourage you to give it a try before buying anything else. Now, if you do have 11 by 17 paper, right, and if you want to cut it, again, I don't personally like taking it into the store because they mess things up and it's not worth the $6 or $7 for me to cut it there. So I will either use a really simple, just at-home trimmer like this one, right? Let me try to open this. It opens up. You can use it for measuring. Just really nice blade. It came with replacements. And I just use this about 10 to 12 pages at a time, right? It depends on the paper capacity to trim my paper. I also have a more heavy-duty guillotine that you can see right here. Again, you don't need this by any means to cut paper, to trim a bind. Deckled edges are perfectly okay. Next piece that you will possibly need, again, this is totally optional. You are welcome to use blank paper in this bind along. You don't need a printer by any means. But let me go ahead and just show you kind of what I use if you do want a printer. Okay, so this is the printer that I have here. The most important pieces I would say for a printer are duplex printing, right? If we're printing back and forth on our pages, it is much easier if your printer does that for you automatically. I have no idea how to do this using just manual printing. There are ways to do it. I've never done it, so can't kind of guide you on that. But duplex printing, so auto duplex, as well as something that is going to be efficient with ink, typically some kind of laser printer or an EcoTank is what I see most often recommended. And so I have the EcoTank 3850, and I really like this one because it has auto duplex printing, prints color. It's not a large format printer, but I have not run into any issues because of that. I personally like this one very much. Okay, the next piece that you are going to need is some kind of flat object, and typically what we use in bookbinding, right? Excuse my really beat up one, but this is called a bone folder. This folds papers much flatter than you could with your hands or your nails or whatever you typically use. Now, if you don't have one of these, that's okay. You can use another object in your home like a ruler, or I want to be really careful when I make this recommendation, but a butter knife. Again, you want to be careful not to hurt yourself if you do end up using one of those things, but a bone folder is going to help us get really nice, sharp, crisp edges on our pieces of paper when we fold them in half. This is kind of what I'm talking about, right? With these folds right here, we will use one of these bone folders to get these sharp, crisp edges here. Alrighty, the next thing that we need to stitch signatures together, right? Again, we're gonna sew these different pieces. We need to make holes that are lined up for us to be able to do this. And for our purposes, we really just need a cardboard paper, right, to do this. I will show you how to make a cradle punch to get those measurements on your own. What I typically use now, I bought this very recently, and so all these books that you see here were made with just a cradle punch that I made using a normal piece of card, like chipboard. This is newer. I've started using this and I really like it, but again, you don't need this, right? Again, all of these were made without this. It was just a piece of normal chipboard. So I'll show you how to do that once we start the bind along. The next thing that we need, right, to actually stitch things together are thread. Normally what we use are waxed thread. So I got all of these in a pack that I bought together, and these are all pre-waxed thread. The reason we use pre-waxed is that, or not pre-waxed, but just waxed, generally speaking, right, is because it doesn't get knotted as easily. You might notice that once you're stitching these, because we use really long pieces of thread, they tend to knot. You can use any thread that you have at home, right? Just being mindful that you might deal with a little bit more knotting and to be patient with yourself. You can also buy thread and wax separately if you want to wax it yourself. Another little tip that I've seen from one of our friends on Instagram was to use floss, actually, and floss tends to be pre-waxed, so I don't see why you couldn't use it. I have never used it myself, but just another little tip, right? If you don't have thread at home, if you really want to use what you have at home, you could try out just floss that you use for your teeth. Now, to actually stitch, you are going to need some kind of needle. I typically use a curved needle. It's a little one here. And this just makes it easier to go in and out of these pieces, these little holes that we make here. You don't need one of these curved needles if you don't have one at home. A straight one is going to be perfectly fine. Again, just use what you have at home. And I realized I completely skipped over how we actually make these holes, right? So I said using some kind of chipboard, we will make a cradle punch, or basically a DIY at-home version of this. But to actually make the holes, we need a really sharp kind of pointy object. These are called, I think, owls. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's spelled A-W-L. I got this one with a kit, right, with all the thread, basically all of these pieces in here with the thread and with the needles. It all came together along with the bone folder and whatnot. It's all linked in my in the link in the description box. And this one came with the cradle punch that I bought. If you do end up wanting an owl, I would recommend just getting it with a kit. There's no reason you should have to buy one of these alone. That being said, if you don't have one of these at home, you could use another sharp object. Again, I am being very careful when I make this recommendation. Please, 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 if you use something other than an owl, be careful. Don't hurt yourself, right? And so if you really wanted to, you could use like a sharp needle, a big needle instead, and punch through that. Again, please be careful. These are pointy. It's harder to grip these than it is this, but if you want to use what you have at home, you can definitely go ahead and use something sharp like a needle. All right, you do see here that I have these kind of ribbons, right, that are in here. They're linen tapes, essentially. They help us round the book and make sure that it maintains its shape, has more longevity. I am going to walk us through a bind along that is 1 inch or shorter bind, and we really don't need these tapes. We don't need to round books that are that small. So you shouldn't need one of these. We will do sewing without any linen tapes on a smaller book. But if you do want to buy this, it is typically available. You can buy really long pieces. This is the one that I got from Amazon. Again, it's linked in my bio. And I have made, this is the first set that I bought since I started binding. I've made about, I think, 18 books now. All of the ones in front of me, they've all been from the same pack, and I still have a ton left over. But again, you don't need that for what we're going to be doing because the bind will be much smaller. All right, the next piece that we are going to need, so what I will be using is a pH neutral glue. The reason that we do pH neutral is because it doesn't eat at the paper. It makes sure that our binds last much longer. PVA also makes it easier so that we're able to put in multiple layers of glue. Typically, when I'm making a bind, there will be at least 2, if not 3 layers of glue going on here. And other types of glue tend to clump, whereas this is really neat, as you can see, right? This is not clumping right here. That being said, you don't need this for the bind along, right? This is helpful if you want to make a book that's going to last long term, but you can use really any just liquid glue that you have available to you. Could go to Dollar Tree, just buy a glue that you find there, like Elmer's. If you want to buy pH neutral glue, you can. Again, totally optional. Just use what you have at home, I'd recommend. But again, knowing that it may not last very long term, right? This might be a book that you use a little bit, might break down, and then you can either rebuild it or bind it again. But just something to be mindful of is that if you're not using pH neutral glue, it probably won't last very long term with a bind. Alrighty, the next thing that we need is some kind of porous cloth. What I have here in front of me is called mull. Another term for it will be cheesecloth, just really some kind of porous cloth. I think cheesecloth tends to be with the pores a little bit close together, but we use this to give our books more longevity. This is going to be the next layer that goes onto this book once I actually round the spine. You don't have to buy this if you don't have it at home. Again, you shouldn't have to buy anything, right? But I'm going to keep saying it. If you have some kind of old cotton blanket, old cotton shirt, anything like old cotton at home, that should be perfectly fine for the purpose of a bind along. Again, just being mindful that, like with the glue, if you don't use pH neutral, if you don't use mull or cheesecloth, the book itself might fall apart more quickly. Again, I think that's perfectly fine. These are going on your bookshelf, right? Knowing that this is going to be your first try. Don't spend money on it. Just use what you have at home, being aware that the book might not last as long as something that you use mull with. This specifically I have bought on Amazon. I've used this for every single book that I've found so far, and there's still a ton left. I don't even know that I'm going to run out of this, like, by the end of this year. We'll see how ambitious I get with binding, but yeah, it's not too expensive, lasts a pretty long time. Again, if you want to use what you have at home, find some kind of cotton cloth and just go ahead and use that. It should be porous enough. Okay, now how do we actually get the glue onto our books, right? How do we do this? You will see a lot of people using paint brushes to do this. I am lazy. I don't want to clean off those brushes. I don't know how folks clean off those brushes. So I use a spatula, just something made of silicone. You can see it is really easy to get the glue off. This is peeling right off from the last layer that I put on this book. And so I really recommend, right, just get something that is going to be easy for you to clean, easy to spread with. This cost me $1 at my local Dollar Tree. It might be $1.25 now, but again, should be really cheap. You probably have a silicone spatula in your kitchen, so if you want to use it for a bind and clean it off, it is really easy to do that. But you should have one of these at home already. I personally stole this one from my husband, and he ended up getting another one. Alrighty, the next piece that you will need for a bind, right, please ignore that, for a bind is going to be end papers of some kind. So these are the decorative papers that go on our books and are going to be glued to our cover. So it will look something like, let's see, when we open it, something like this, right? This will be the inside of our bind, essentially. There's one of those imperfections that I told you about, right? Glue right there. But this is for home. I'm lazy. I don't really care. So your end paper will be something that goes essentially on your cover as well as glued onto that first page that you use. Now there are a lot of ways to make end papers. You can use end papers that you, like craft paper that you buy at the store. For example, this is a set that I got at Michael's. It's $5, I think, for the entire thing. Has some pretty ones in here. You can use one of this. If you have scrapbooking paper at home, craft paper, go ahead and use that. You can cut this to size, again, using some kind of scissor. I use just my paper cutter. And then another option, if you have a printer, if you want to get fancy like I have with some of my binds that I just showed you, you can buy just normal craft paper. This is, let me see what thickness it says it is. It says. So this right here is 65 pounds and it's just 8.5 by 11. So it fits my papers perfectly on these binds. And these come in a lot of different colors. I have gotten these from Michael's myself when they were on sale. There are also just white ones, same kind of weight, as you can see, thicker than normal paper, but still not super thick. And I just print onto these after I make my designs, and I will glue them into my book, just fold them in half, glue them in. So you can do that if you have a printer, if you want to get fancy. If not, you can just go to the store, right? Buy a paper pad of some kind. Michael's always seems to have one that's on sale. Just keep an eye out when it's on sale, or buy whatever is cheap. You can also buy loose leaf ones at Michael's for I think like 50 cents, $1. I'm not sure what the price is nowadays, but you can buy these by the piece if you want as well. Okay, the next piece to actually make the cover, whatever this material is made out of, right? This is chipboard that I have used, and so that is going to be essentially what I showed you before to make the cradle punch cradle. And so the one that I use is 70 point thickness. I don't know that I would go any lower than this particularly. I got mine like a batch of I think 30 on Amazon. I'm able to use usually like 1 or 2 of these for each bind, and they're 8.5 by 11, and these tend to be thick enough, firm enough that they make for good covers. Now, if you don't have these at home, if you don't want to buy one of these, right, totally okay. You probably have old books at home that you don't want, like hardcover books, and those will also have chipboard for the cover. You can rip those books apart if you want. I hate saying it out loud, but you could rip open an old book apart and just harvest like the chipboard that's inside. You could also just use a old binder that you have at home, because they typically have these chipboards tucked into the front and the back, and use it from there. So you don't have to buy these if you don't want to. I just bought it in a pack of 30, right? There's a whole bunch that you can see in here, and these last me a while. I'm typically able to get 1 book out of each of these, so 1 for 1, and so 30 books. Alrighty, the next thing that you are going to need, I should have said this much earlier, is some kind of measuring device, right? I prefer to use a metal ruler because it's hard to cut through these. With a craft knife, plastic I have used as well pretty successfully, but I have I've cut into that and I don't think it works as well. But you can use really any kind of ruler that you have at home, just something that measures. Admittedly, like I mentioned, you are going to need a craft knife. This is again to cut into the chipboard for the covers. You're not going to be able to cut the covers with this right here. This is not strong enough, right? I don't even like using my guillotine to cut covers because it really just damages the blade. These are the chipboards are much thicker. So get yourself some kind of knife. I got these, I think 3 for $5 on Amazon. You can probably go to the Dollar Tree if you don't have a box cutter at home. But again, use a box cutter if you have one. But just some kind of really cutting device that's going to help you cut, and then some kind of ruler that will help you keep your edges straight, help you measure. Something else that you will need, you'll probably have one of these lying around at home. This looks similar to the chipboard, but as you can see, it is much thinner, right? Let me pull this up for comparison. So this is the thickness of the board, and then this right here is the thickness of what we'll use for the spine piece. Now, as I say that, I realize, typically I use something much thinner for the spine. If I'm making a really large book like Invictus here, like DMAT Mobile, Disappearances, for something smaller, which we'll do for the spine along, like Manacle to this copy right here, you can use just the normal chipboard to give the spine more structure. And so if you end up harvesting this from one of your old books or harvesting from a old binder, you can use one of these for your spine as well. If you don't have enough of these at home and you need something else for the spine, you can probably take an old paper towel roll, like the inside insert of that, what they wrap the paper around, and this will be that will be perfect for it as well. I personally bought these on Amazon, a big pack. I think they were like 30 or like close to 50 for $20. I'm able to get a couple bucks out of each one myself, so I really like using these. But again, you should have this at home in the form of like a paper towel wrapper or holder. Alrighty, the next thing that you are going to need is either book cloth or craft paper. Now, I say this with the caveat that I really think what material you choose really depends on how decorative you want to be and also the resources you have available to you. Now, if you don't have a printer, right, I might recommend like getting some kind of craft paper, like decorative paper, if you want to practice with a blank journal or something like that. You can use one of these, right, like to cover your book as well. This is perfectly fine right here. If you do have a printer, but you don't have access to say like a Cricut, you want something on your actual cover, you can go ahead and use like this kind of craft paper, print onto it, and then paste this onto your book as well. You can use photo paper, right? That's what I used for like this right here. This is photo paper, as you can kind of see, and print onto it using your printer and then paste it on. Like the whole thing is covered with photo paper, essentially. This one right here, let me give you an example, right? This is paper. You can't really tell probably from this, but this is paper. And then I used a Cricut to go over this. I probably could have stuck this in my printer if I wanted to print onto it, but I used a Cricut. And then as you can tell, like other pieces are cloth. So if you have a Cricut at your disposal, for whatever reason, if you were into crafts before, have a Cricut, you can use book cloth of some kind. Right now, this is from Amazon. I got this for fairly cheap. I personally don't have any issues with it. I have really liked using this book cloth. Is it fancy book cloth? No, by no means is it fancy. Is it cheap book cloth? Yeah, it is, and it works perfectly fine for my purposes, right? Like this right here is same brand, just different color. As you can tell, like same book cloth, different color. And so if you want to buy book cloth because you have a Cricut available to you, you have something you can use, you can probably get it really cheap on Amazon. Now, the difference between regular cloth and book cloth is that, you have this cloth on one side and the other side has paper on it, essentially. And this prevents the glue, right, our glue, from seeping through to the other side and just gives it more structure. Again, do you need this? No. You can use any paper that you have available to you. You could literally take this blank piece of like white paper and use this to cover your book. That is how I made my first book, right? I just used blank craft paper, nothing fancy at all. All that to say, literally, the opportunities, like the choices are endless. You can do many different things. You can do any combination of things. You can use paper and cloth together, a picture. You can use just plain cloth over the entire book and use HTV. You can use just photo paper for the entire thing, right? You can use faux leather if you want and cover the entire, like it is really, really up to you. I think the easiest thing to do, the easiest way to approach all of this is to use some kind of decorative paper if you don't have a printer at your disposal to make the cover look pretty. Same thing that you use on your end papers, right? You could just use this. Second easiest thing, if you have a printer and you want to make a cover that looks a little bit fancier, you could very easily just print a cover, right? Design and print and cover your whole book with photo paper. That's what I did here. This is one of my earlier binds. I think it looks perfectly fine. It's sitting on my shelf. I can read it. It's totally fine. You could also use, again, craft paper print onto this. This would also be very easy. You wouldn't have to buy any extra paper if you have craft paper already. And so the sky's your limit. The opportunities are endless. I believe I forgot this, but a book press, right? We use this at all stages of binding. Mine is really beat up at this point. It works perfectly fine. There's a book in here right now sitting. And if you don't have one of these, totally okay. Don't even worry about it. You can literally just pile on something heavy onto your books to get it to sit flat. Like you could pile up a couple of books. You could place like a heavy laptop on it. Really anything that is heavy will do perfectly fine and function as a book press. You don't need one of these. I personally like having one and invested in one, but again, not necessary by any means. You can make one of these at home as well. I've obviously not done that, so I don't know how, and I'm not going to try to explain it to you, but if you don't have a book press, just pile on some heavy books to get it to stay down. The point is that it is adding pressure. It is just pushing these pieces together and flattening them, right? And I Another optional piece, if you want ribbons like you see on all my books here. Like all of these, some kind of bookmark type ribbon on your book. These are 3/4 inch just ribbon that I bought at Michael's. You can get them on Amazon as well. Again, completely optional. You can make a book without this. You can stick a piece of paper in a book and it is a bookmark. I think that's essentially everything that you should need. You should be able to use what you have at home, right, for this entire bind along. You don't need to buy things. If you want to buy things, again, you can. Everything that I use and have talked about so far is linked in my bio, except for the craft papers that I've bought at Michael's. The next couple pieces that I'm going to mention are completely optional. You don't need these. I use them for my binds now, but you can also just use other things that you have available to you. So the first one here, right, is like these headbands, essentially, headband and end band. And if you can see, like, I have them on my books just right along. I think